They live here now.
The welcome mat at my front door was the last thing I picked out before the closing papers were signed. It was thick, woven coir, stenciled with 3 simple words: "Home begins here." For 3 years, while I lived in a cramped studio apartment above a dry cleaner, saving every dollar from my salary as a hospital administrator, those words were a quiet mantra. On the day of the housewarming, the afternoon sun slanted through the living room windows, catching the dust motes dancing over the new hardwood. The smell of cedar, fresh paint, and the garlic and herb roast I'd spent all morning preparing filled the air. "Maya, honey, where do you want these napkins?" My mother, Eleanor, called from the kitchen. She was already adjusting the placements of the platters I had carefully arranged. "Just on the island is fine, Mom," I said, walking in to find her straightening a stack of linen squares. She looked at me, her eyes soft but analytical, the way she always looked when she was assessing a space. "It's a beautiful house, Maya," she said, leaning over to kiss my cheek. "A little far from the center of town, maybe, but the yard is wonderful. Lots of room. More room than one person really needs, honestly. It's exactly the right amount of room for me," I smiled, choosing not to take the bait. At 34, I had learned that Eleanor's compliments usually came with a small trailing anchor of critique. By 4 in the afternoon, the house was full. My aunts were gathered around the kitchen island, debating the merits of my quartz countertops, and a few colleagues from the hospital were out on the small back patio, enjoying the unusually warm autumn breeze. I felt a deep, grounding sense of accomplishment. I had done this myself. Every mortgage payment, every inspection fee, every gallon of paint had come from my own labor. Then the front doorbell rang. I headed through the entryway, stepping over the "Home Begins Here" mat to pull the door open. Expecting my neighbor, or perhaps a late arrival from work, I froze. My younger sister, Chloe, stood on the porch. Beside her was her husband, David. They weren't carrying a housewarming gift. Instead, between them sat 4 oversized suitcases, 2 duffel bags, and a plastic laundry basket overflowing with coats and mismatched shoes. David's eyes immediately darted to the ground, his face flushing a deep, uncomfortable crimson. Chloe, however, offered a tight, exhausted smile and immediately dropped her shoulder bag onto my bench. "Hey," Chloe said, her voice thin. "We made it." "Chloe, David." I looked from their faces to the luggage piled on the porch. What's all this?" Before Chloe could answer, my mother appeared behind me. She didn't look surprised. In fact, she looked relieved, stepping past me onto the porch and immediately pulling Chloe into a tight hug. "Oh, thank goodness you're here safely," Mom murmured into Chloe's hair. She let go and looked at me, her expression shifting into that familiar, authoritative look she used when she was managing a family crisis. "Maya, let's get these bags inside before the neighbors start staring. David, take the heavy ones straight back to the guest room." My throat tightened. "Wait. Mom, what's going on?" David hesitated, his hands gripping the handle of a massive rolling suitcase. "Maya, look. I'm sorry." "David, just take them back," Mom interrupted gently but firmly. She turned to me, placing a hand on my forearm. Her palm was warm, her tone entirely matter-of-fact. "Maya, they had to leave the apartment. The landlord raised the rent again, and David's hours at the firm were cut last month. They can't afford it right now. They live here now, just until they get back on their feet." The noise of the party behind me, the clinking of wine glasses, the laughter of my aunts, the soft jazz playing on the speaker, seemed to recede into a dull hum. "They live here?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, you didn't ask me. We never talked about this. There wasn't time to have a whole committee meeting about it." "Maya," Mom said, her tone laced with a gentle reproach that suggested I was being unreasonable. "They had to be out by noon today. What was I supposed to do? Let your sister go to a shelter? Family takes care of family. You have that beautiful guest room sitting there completely empty." Chloe looked down, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "It's only temporary, Maya. I swear. We didn't know where else to go." David stood by the doorway, holding 2 bags, looking as though he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "Maya, If this is too much, we can find a motel for tonight. I told Eleanor we should have called. A motel, Mom scoffed, stepping into the entryway. Don't be ridiculous, David. Waste money when Maya has a 4-bedroom house? Maya, tell them it's fine. I looked at my mother, then at my sister, whose eyes were wide and brimming with a familiar, fragile anxiety that had dictated our family dynamics for as long as I could remember. Whenever Chloe tripped, Mom was there to build a bridge over the puddle. And because I was the stable one, the independent one, I was always expected to be the pillar holding the bridge up. Let's just get through the party, I said, my heart pounding against my ribs. We'll talk about this tonight. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles. I moved through my guests, answering questions about the house while acutely aware of the thudding sounds coming from the back hallway as Chloe and David moved their belongings into my newly styled guest room. My Aunt Sarah cornered me near the food table, holding a small plate of bruschetta. Everything all right, Maya? I saw Chloe arrive with, well, it looked like a lot of luggage. They're staying for a few days, I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. Just transitioning between places. Ah, Sarah nodded, her eyes full of a knowing sympathy that made me want to shrink. Eleanor always finds a way to rearrange the furniture, doesn't she? Even when it's someone else's house. By 9 o'clock, the guests had cleared out. The house was quiet again, save for the hum of the dishwasher and the low murmur of voices coming from the guest room. Mom had stayed behind, ostensibly to help me clean up, but I knew she was waiting for the inevitable conversation. I was wiping down the island when she walked into the kitchen, a half-empty glass of white wine in her hand. They're exhausted, Mom said, pulling out a bar stool and sitting down. They've been packing all night. I told Chloe to just leave the rest of the boxes in my garage for now. I set the dishcloth down, leaning against the counter. Mom, how long has this been planned? Mom took a sip of her wine, looking at the quartz surface. It wasn't planned, Maya. It was an emergency. Chloe called me crying 3 days ago. They couldn't make the deposit on the new place they looked at, and the old landlord wouldn't give them an extension. 3 days ago, I said slowly. You knew 3 days ago, and you didn't think to call me? To ask if I was comfortable with this? If I had asked, you would have hesitated, Mom said simply, looking up at me with absolute sincerity. You would have listed all the reasons why it wasn't convenient. But Maya, family isn't about convenience. You are in a position to help. Look at this house. You have the space. Chloe is your sister. This isn't about the space, Mom. It's about respect, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though my hands were shaking slightly. I just bought this house. I haven't even spent a full week here by myself. I planned for this to be my sanctuary. And it still is, Mom said, reaching across the counter to touch my hand. But right now, your sister needs a sanctuary too. She's your flesh and blood. You've always been the strong one, Maya. You don't know what it's like to struggle the way she does. She struggles because you never let her face the consequences of her choices, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Mom's face hardened, the warmth instantly evaporating. She pulled her hand back. That is a cruel thing to say. Chloe has had a run of bad luck. David is trying hard. Are you really telling me you'd rather see them out on the street, just so you can have an empty guest room? The door to the hallway clicked open, and David walked in. He had changed into a faded t-shirt and sweatpants. He stopped short when he saw the tension in the room. Sorry, he muttered. Just wanted to get a glass of water. Go ahead, David, Mom said, her voice softening instantly. Maya was just saying how glad she is that we could find a solution for you guys. David looked at me, his eyes tired and deeply apologetic. He filled a glass from the refrigerator dispenser. Maya, I really am sorry about the timing. We didn't mean to crash your party. Eleanor insisted that you wouldn't mind. I looked at David. Of the two of them, he was the one who seemed to understand the weight of what they were asking. It's okay, David. It's just been a long day. We'll be out of your hair as soon as we can, he said quietly. I'm looking for a second job in the evenings. Once we save up the first month's rent and security, we're gone. I promise. Thank you, David, I said. He nodded awkwardly and retreated down the hall. As soon as he was gone, Mom stood up, gathering her purse from the counter. You see, she said, adjusting her jacket. He's trying. They just need a little grace, Maya. I'm going to head home. Let them sleep in tomorrow. She walked toward the front door. I followed her, watching as she stepped onto the Home Begins Here mat. She turned back to me, kissing my cheek once more. I'm proud of you for buying this place, Maya, she whispered. But remember who you are, you're a sister first. After she left, I locked the door and stood in the quiet entryway. I looked down at the mat. The words felt less like a promise now, and more like a challenge. By the fourth day, the quiet rhythm I had envisioned for my new life had completely shattered. I woke up at 6 in the morning, as I always did, needing to get ready for an early administrator meeting at the hospital. When I walked into the kitchen, the counters were covered in open cereal boxes. A half-empty carton of milk sat sweating on the island, and the sink was piled high with dirty dishes from the night before. Chloe was sitting at the island, wrapped in a fleece blanket, scrolling through her phone. "Morning," she mumbled, not looking up. "Morning," I said, moving past her to put the milk back in the fridge. "Chloe, could you make sure the milk goes back inside? It's been sitting out all night." "Oh, sorry. David must have left it," she said indifferently, her thumb continuing to swipe across her screen. I sighed, pulling a coffee mug from the cupboard. "Is David already gone?" "Yeah, he left at 5. He got a temporary shift at a warehouse across town. He's trying to get as many hours as possible." "That's good," I said, sitting down across from her. I took a breath, trying to approach the conversation with the empathy I knew the situation required. "Chloe, we need to talk about how this is going to work. We didn't get a chance to set any ground rules because everything happened so fast." Chloe finally put her phone down, her shoulders instantly tensing. "Ground rules? Maya, we've only been here 4 days." "I know, but we're already living on top of each other. I have a very demanding job, and I need to know what the plan is. How long do you think you'll need to save up?" "I don't know," she said, her voice rising slightly, adopting that defensive tone she always used when she felt cornered. "David's hours are unstable, and I'm still only working part-time at the boutique. We're doing the best we can. Mom said we shouldn't stress about a hard deadline right away." "Mom doesn't live here, Chloe," I said gently. "I do, and while I want to help you, I need to know that there's an end date, and in the meantime, we need to share the responsibilities. The dishes, the groceries, keeping the common areas clean." Chloe's eyes brimmed with sudden tears. "You think I want to be here? You think I enjoy living in my older sister's house, feeling like a charity case? Every time you look at me, I feel like you're judging me for not having my life together the way you do." "I'm not judging you." "Yes, you are," she said, standing up, the fleece blanket trailing behind her. "You've always looked down on me because things are harder for me. I'll do the stupid dishes, Maya. You don't have to lecture me." She stormed down the hallway, slamming the guest room door behind her. I sat alone in the kitchen, the steam rising from my coffee mug. The weight of the house felt heavy, suffocating. I didn't want to be the villain in her story, but I could already feel the boundaries of my own home slipping through my fingers. That evening, I drove over to my mother's house. I needed to talk to her away from Chloe and David, away from the immediate tension of the guest room. Mom's house was the place where we had grown up, a comfortable, slightly cluttered suburban home filled with decades of family photos. When I walked in, she was at the stove, stirring a pot of chicken noodle soup. "Maya, what a nice surprise," she said, smiling warmly. "Are you staying for dinner? I made extra so I could send some back with you for Chloe and David." "No, Mom, I can't stay," I said, sitting at the small kitchen table. "We need to talk about Chloe." Mom's smile faded, her posture stiffening slightly as she lowered the heat on the stove. "What happened? Did you two have a fight?" "We had a conversation about expectations, and she blew up at me," I said. "Mom, you shouldn't have told her she didn't need a deadline. You shouldn't have promised them they could stay indefinitely without consulting me." Mom sat down across from me, sighing deeply. She looked older in the soft kitchen light, the lines around her eyes deeper. "Maya, you don't understand the pressure they are under. David's family doesn't have 2 pennies to rub together. They have no one else. If we don't hold them up, they will fall. And what happens if I break under the weight of holding them up?" I asked, looking her in the eye. I worked 70 hours a week sometimes to save for that down payment. I sacrificed a lot to have a space of my own. It isn't fair for you to decide that my sacrifice should now belong to them. It's not a sacrifice if it's for your sister, Mom said, her voice carrying a quiet, unyielding conviction. When your father died and we lost the store, your Aunt Sarah let us stay with her for 6 months. 6 months, Maya. We slept on her living room floor. She never asked for a dime, and she never made us feel like a burden. That is what families do. That was a different situation, Mom. You were a widow with 2 young children. Chloe and David are adults. They've been married for 4 years. Every time they run into financial trouble, you step in and manage it. Last year it was their car payment. The year before that, it was their credit card debt. Because they are struggling, Mom's voice rose, a flash of defensive anger in her eyes. Would you prefer I let them drown? You've always been lucky, Maya. Success came easily to you. I felt a sharp stab of hurt in my chest. Luck? Mom, you know that's not true. I went to school at night while working a full-time job. I didn't take vacations. I didn't buy new clothes. I planned, and I saved. Chloe buys designer bags she can't afford, and then wonders why she can't pay her rent. That isn't bad luck. That's a lack of accountability. Mom stood up, turning her back to me to turn off the stove. I won't sit here and listen to you criticize your sister. She is doing the best she can. If having them in your house is such an awful burden, then I'll figure something else out. But I thought I raised a daughter who possessed some basic compassion. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the unresolved grievances of a lifetime. I realized then that my mother didn't see her actions as an intrusion on my life. She saw them as a moral obligation. In her mind, my independence wasn't an achievement to be respected. It was a resource to be redistributed. I do have compassion, Mom, I said quietly, standing up to leave. But compassion without boundaries isn't love. It's enabling. She didn't turn around as I walked out the door. By the 7th day, the atmosphere in my house had shifted from uncomfortable to adversarial. Chloe barely spoke to me, moving through the house like a ghost whenever I was in the room. David, conversely, seemed to be trying to compensate for the tension by working himself to the bone. He looked exhausted, his eyes bloodshot, his shoulders slouched from long hours of manual labor. It was a rainy Thursday evening when the pressure valve finally blew. I arrived home after a stressful shift at the hospital to find the front door unlocked. I stepped inside, wiping my wet shoes on the Home Begins Here mat. The living room was dark, but the kitchen light was on. Chloe was sitting at the island, a glass of wine in front of her. Across from her sat my mother. They were surrounded by several open brochures for local apartment complexes. I stopped in the doorway, my coat still dripping water onto the floor. Mom? What are you doing here? Mom looked up, her expression guarded. I came over to help Chloe look at some listings. We're trying to find something within their budget. At 9 o'clock at night? I asked, hanging my coat up in the closet. And why was the front door unlocked? I must have forgotten to click the deadbolt when I came in, Mom said defensively. It's a safe neighborhood, Maya. Don't be so dramatic. It's my house, Mom. I lock the doors, I said, walking into the kitchen. I looked at the brochures spread across the counter. Did you find anything? Chloe let out a bitter laugh, leaning back in her stool. Not unless we want to live in a place with mold and broken windows. Everything out there requires 3 times the rent and income, plus first, last, and security. We don't have $5,000 just sitting around, Maya. David is working extra shifts, Chloe, I said, trying to remain calm. If you both pull together, you can save that in a few months. A few months? Chloe looked at Mom, her eyes filling with tears. You see, she wants us out now. She's tracking every penny, counting the days. Maya, Mom said, her voice taking on that low, maternal warning tone. Can we please not do this tonight? Chloe had a terrible day at work. Her hours were cut again. I felt a cold wave of clarity wash over me. I looked at my sister, who was hiding behind our mother's protection, and then at my mother, who was eagerly stepping into the role of shield. This dynamic had existed since we were children. Whenever Chloe failed a test, lost a job, or broke a rule, Mom found a way to blame the circumstances rather than Chloe. And because I never complained, I was left to navigate the periphery of their emotional drama. Why were your hours cut, Chloe? I asked, looking directly at my sister. Chloe blinked, caught off guard. Because business is slow. David told me yesterday that the boutique is busier than ever because of the fall season, I said quietly. Did you show up late again? Chloe's face turned bright red. She stood up, knocking her stool back a few inches. How dare you spy on me? How dare you talk to my husband about my job? I didn't spy on you. David was sitting right here at this counter, eating a bowl of cereal at midnight because he was too tired to go to sleep, and he was worried about how they were going to pay for your phone bill. He's exhausted, Chloe. He is working himself to death, and you can't even show up to work on time? That's enough, Maya, Mom shouted, standing up to place herself between us. You have no right to speak to your sister that way. You don't know the struggles she deals with. She has anxiety. We all have anxiety, Mom. I snapped, my voice finally cracking under the weight of a week's worth of suppressed anger. I manage an entire department at a hospital during a staffing shortage. I have anxiety every single day, but I get up and I show up because no one else is going to pay my mortgage for me. You are not helping her by defending this behavior. You are destroying her marriage, and you are destroying my relationship with her. I am trying to keep this family together, Mom cried out, her eyes bright with tears. You've always been so cold, Maya, so self-righteous. You think because you have money and a house that you're better than us. The words felt like a physical blow. The kitchen, the beautiful kitchen I had designed and paid for, suddenly felt like a courtroom where I was being tried for the crime of succeeding. I don't think I'm better than anyone, I whispered, the anger draining out of me, replaced by a profound, hollow sadness. But I do know that I cannot live like this. This is my home, and I need you both to leave. The room went completely silent. The only sound was the rain drumming against the window pane. Chloe looked at Mom, her defiance suddenly crumbling into genuine panic. Mom? Mom drew herself up to her full height, her expression tightening into a mask of cold disappointment. If you turn your sister out into the rain, Maya, do not expect me to forget it. If she leaves, I leave too. I won't step foot in this house again. Then don't, I said, looking her straight in the eye. The front door clicked open, and David stepped into the entryway. He was soaked from the rain, his boots muddy, his face pale with exhaustion. He took one look at the three of us standing in the kitchen, the tears, the brochures, the rigid postures, and stopped. He looked down at the welcome mat beneath his feet, then up at me. I'll get the bags, David said quietly. The silence that followed their departure was the loudest thing I had ever heard. They didn't leave that night. It was too late, and despite everything, I couldn't let David drive in that downpour while blind with fatigue. But by 10 o'clock the next morning, the guest room was empty again. The suitcases were gone. The sheets were stripped from the bed, left in a neat, clinical pile on the mattress. They had moved into my mother's small two-bedroom house. David had insisted on it, refusing to let Mom rent a motel room for them. For 2 days, I lived in total isolation. No one called. No one texted. My phone, usually buzzing with family group chats and weekend plans, remained stubbornly quiet. I spent hours sitting in my living room, looking out at the yard, trying to feel the sense of triumph I had anticipated when I first bought the property. Instead, I just felt a lingering ache. On the 9th day, I couldn't take the silence anymore. I drove down to the small neighborhood cafe near my mother's house. I knew David often stopped there for coffee before his second shift started. I found him sitting in a corner booth, staring into a mug of black coffee, a notebook open in front of him filled with rows of numbers. Mind if I sit down? I asked gently. David jumped slightly, looking up. He looked even more tired than he had 2 days ago, but the defensive edge was gone. He nodded, sliding his notebook closed. Hey, Maya. Yeah, go ahead. I sat across from him, placing my hands on the warm laminate table. How are things at Mom's? David let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Crowded. Your mom is, well, she's trying to manage everything. She's already talking about taking out a personal loan to help us with a deposit. Don't let her do that, David, I said softly. I won't, he said, looking out the window. I told her no yesterday. We had a huge argument about it. She started crying, saying I was throwing her love back in her face. He turned his eyes back to me, and for the first time, I saw a profound clarity in them. I love Chloe, Maya. But your mom has spent 26 years teaching her that someone else will always pick up the bill, and I've spent 4 years letting myself be the someone else. But I can't do it anymore. It's killing my self-respect. I know, I said. I'm sorry I yelled the other night, David. I wasn't trying to humiliate you. You didn't humiliate me. You told the truth, he said quietly. When you told us to leave, it was like a wake-up call. I realized we were treating your success like it was a shared bank account. It wasn't fair to you. You earned that house. Thank you, I said, feeling a tight knot in my chest begin to loosen. Where do you go from here? I found a small studio apartment over on Elm Street, he said, tapping the notebook. It's tiny, and the neighborhood isn't great, but we can afford it on my current wages if we cut everything else out. I told Chloe this morning that I'm signing the lease. With or without her. What did she say? She cried. She called me cruel. David sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. But then, about an hour ago, she called the boutique and asked if she could have her full-time hours back. She's at work right now, Maya. Actually showing up. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. That's a start. It's a start, he agreed, standing up and grabbing his jacket. Thanks for the coffee, Maya, and thanks for saying no. I think we needed to hear it. On the 10th day, the rain had cleared, leaving the sky a brilliant, crisp blue. I was working in my garden, pulling up the weeds that had encroached on the flower beds during the week of chaos, when a car pulled into the driveway. I wiped my dirt-stained hands on my jeans as I stood up. My mother got out of the car. She wasn't carrying a pot of soup or a stack of brochures. She walked slowly up the walkway, her steps hesitant. She stopped a few feet away from me, looking down at the "Home Begins Here" mat at the front door. She stood there for a long time, just staring at the words. David signed a lease today, Mom said, her voice quiet, devoid of the sharp authority she usually carried. I know. I saw him yesterday, I said, stepping onto the porch. Mom looked up at me, her eyes watery. I felt so rejected when you told us to leave, Maya. I felt like everything I had built, this idea that we are a unit, that we protect each other, was breaking apart. I thought you were turning your back on your sister. I wasn't turning my back on her, Mom. I was stepping out of the cycle, I said, leaning against the doorframe. As long as I let you give away my space to fix her problems. Chloe never had to face the reality of her own life. And you never had to let her grow up. Mom swallowed hard, looking back down at the mat. She's my baby, Maya. When your father died, I promised myself I would never let either of you feel unprotected again. I guess I got confused about what protection looks like. She looked at me, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace in the family and protecting your own peace? The question hung in the cool autumn air, resonant and heavy with years of shared history. Yes, I said softly, reaching out to take her hand. Her fingers were trembling. I chose it this week. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I did it because I love this family. I want a relationship with Chloe that isn't built on resentment. And I want a relationship with you that isn't built on obligation. Mom looked at our joined hands, then up at my face. She didn't apologize. Not explicitly. It wasn't in her nature to completely undo decades of maternal pride in a single afternoon. But she pulled me into a hug, her grip tight and fierce, the way she used to hold me when I was a little girl. Can I come in? She whispered as she pulled back. Just for a cup of tea? I smiled, stepping aside to open the door wide. Of course you can, Mom. Come on in. As she walked across the threshold, stepping firmly over the woven coir mat, I felt a deep, settled warmth settle over the house. The tension of the past 10 days hadn't vanished completely. The scars of the confrontation were still fresh, and the road ahead for Chloe and David would be long and difficult. But as the door clicked shut behind us, locking securely into place, I knew that the foundation had finally shifted. The boundaries were set, the sanctuary was safe, and for the very first time since the keys were handed to me, my home truly felt like my own.